Welcome to M360, where lost truths meet future solutions. Let's break the cycle. Today, we're diving into this really fascinating collection of ideas, innovations even. And according to our sources, these things were maybe intentionally suppressed or just forgotten. Think of it like we're digging through history,
Yeah.
looking for these potential game changers that got buried. The source uses terms like greed, fear, control, or misunderstanding as reasons why.
Right. And based on the material you shared, our mission today really is to try and understand why. Why did these promising solutions get sidelined? And maybe more importantly, how could we, revive some of them now? We'll be looking across different fields. There's stuff on alternative medicine, energy tech, even different economic models. The goal isn't just laying out facts, but hopefully sparking some, I don't know, aha moments, offering a fresh perspective on today's challenges.
Okay, let's get into it. So the source material kicks off by framing this M360 concept as a resurrection of these forgotten ideas. And it's careful to say, look, these aren't necessarily like wild conspiracy theories, but instances where a real potential was just stopped
Yeah.
by those factors you mentioned.
Yeah.
Greed, fear, control, misunderstanding. It also brings up the Cobra Effect
Yeah.
and vested interests as key reasons.
That Cobra Effect mention is interesting, isn't it? Because it really points to situations where you try to fix something, but the solution actually makes the problem worse or creates a new one. And if you think about that with suppressed ideas, maybe some things were pushed aside because they worked too well, because they threatened, existing systems or industries that were making a lot of money,
Right.
which then had knock-on effects.
Exactly. And one of the first areas the source dives into is medical cures silenced.
Mm.
It suggests pretty strongly that natural remedies, alternative medicines, holistic stuff, sometimes deliberately discredited, even banned. And the reasons were posed, not only safety or lack of effectiveness, but the threat these things pose to, well, the pharmaceutical industry, because you couldn't patent them easily. Talks about low-cost treatments for big things, cancer, diabetes, chronic pain that maybe didn't get traction because, well, no big patent payoff.
Well, that does touch on how our healthcare systems are set up,
Yeah.
the incentives involved. I mean, think about R&D for new drugs. Getting that patent is a huge financial driver for companies to invest millions or billions. So maybe the issue for these non-patentable, cheaper options isn't always active suppression, but maybe just the sheer difficulty of funding the big studies and getting through regulations without that promise of, market exclusivity. It's a tough hurdle.
Okay, but then it gets even more provocative with free energy invention suppressed. Nikola Tesla comes up, obviously, a key figure. The source talks about his vision, wireless electricity for everyone. But it claims he was, well, actively undermined. Corporate titans getting in the way. The argument is that decentralized, maybe even free energy, that just didn't work for the big energy companies' control and profit model. They specifically mentioned JP Morgan pulling funding for Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower project as proof. And it also mentions patents disappearing, inventors getting ridiculed, basically stopping progress.
Yeah, the Tesla story it's a mix, isn't it? There's the visionary genius, but also the hard economic realities back then. Wireless power is an incredible idea, obviously, but there are also massive technical challenges, huge ones. So pulling the funding for Wardenclyffe, I mean, the source frames it as protecting profits, which might be true, but it could also have reflected genuine doubts about whether it was actually feasible at that time with the tech they had. It really shows that tension, doesn't it, between disruptive ideas and the existing way of doing things, both technologically and economically.
Then the source moves on to indigenous wisdom
Hmm.
erased, unquote. It argues that loads of ancient practices, things like regenerative farming, traditional childbirth methods, they were just dismissed or actively suppressed, all in the name of modernization. The claim is that knowledge that kept communities going for centuries was just replaced by industrial alternatives that, surprise, surprise, mostly benefited corporate interests.
And that brings up a really vital point about how we value different kinds of knowledge, doesn't it? Indigenous knowledge is often based on, centuries of just watching, adapting to very specific places, its deep ecological understanding. But it's often viewed differently than, say, Western scientific methods. So dismissing it as unscientific could mean we've genuinely lost really effective, sustainable solutions that were perfectly tailored to local needs just because we favored standardized industrial approaches. A real loss.
Yeah, definitely. And it keeps going. The source also hits on community-based economies dismantled.
Mm-hmm.
It talks about how things like local barter systems, co-ops, self-sufficient villages, they were kind of shifted, transformed into consumer markets.
Yeah.
And the result, the source says, was people losing independence, becoming dependent on this bigger system, basically lifelong customers.
It's interesting to think about that historical shift. I mean, moving from really local economies to these big interconnected markets, it definitely brought benefits, right? Efficiency, access to more goods, all that, can't deny it. But like the source points out, maybe it also weakened that local strength, made communities more vulnerable when things go wrong elsewhere in the system. It's complex. There are upsides and downsides for sure.
So the big question the source keeps circling back to is why? Why crush these seemingly good ideas? And the answer gives us pretty blunt. Profit, power, control, often just stronger drivers than healing or real progress. Brings back the Cobra Effect idea too, like even good intentions backfire, and anything you can't easily make money from gets sidelined.
Mhm.
The core message seems to be, look, lots of problems can be solved cheaply or even freely, but certain powers, they don't allow it.
That viewpoint really makes you step back and think about what drives innovation, what drives development in our society. If you look at the system, profit is a powerful engine, no doubt. But it can also create these blind spots or biases against solutions that just don't fit the money-making model. It definitely sparks important conversations about how we could maybe design systems that value broad well-being alongside the economics, not just one or the other.
Okay, but it's not all doom and gloom. The source does pivot. It shifts towards real solutions for the present and future.
Sure.
It starts outlining practical things that, individuals and communities can actually do.
Which is crucial, right? Moving from just analyzing the problem to actually empowering people. It basically says, okay, even if stuff was suppressed historically, there are ways forward now.
Exactly. First one highlighted is localized regenerative agriculture.
Yeah.
Basically moving away from chemical farming towards these regenerative organic systems. It mentions things like syntropic farming, which is kind of cool. It mimics natural forest systems to build soil, or Masanobu Fukuoka's One Straw Revolution. Heard of that? The benefits, it claims, are restoring soil, better nutrition and food, and getting farmers out from under the thumb of big corporations selling seeds and pesticides.
And that lines up perfectly with what science is telling us more and more about soil health. It's vital for the environment, for climate, and for our own nutrition. So focusing on building healthy soil, these regenerative methods.
Yeah, they offer a really promising alternative to industrial practices that have often, frankly, damaged the soil and caused environmental problems. Okay, next up, decentralized healthcare and prevented healing. This is more about taking charge of yourself, right? Focusing on nutrition, herbs, fasting, mental well-being. A proactive approach. The source points to people like Dr. Mark Hyman, Dr. Jamnadas, and suggests looking into open source databases for herbal info. The goal seems to be empowering people to care for themselves more, rely less on just the conventional medical system for everything.
Yeah, it reflects that growing interest in holistic health, looking at the whole picture, mind, body, environment, all connected. Conventional medicine is obviously critical. We need it. But these preventive things, self-care practices, they can be really valuable tools for just staying well, maybe even easing the burden on the healthcare system overall. Though it's important, for people to make informed choices, get reliable information.
Then there's energy. Free open source energy exploration. This is about encouraging local innovation. Community energy like solar microgrids. Looking at things like open source ecology or local energy co-ops. The idea to become less dependent on the big centralized power grid, lower costs eventually. It specifically mentions investing in off-grid tech and supporting solar cooperatives as ways to get more energy independence.
And with renewables getting cheaper and more accessible, this is super relevant right now. Decentralized energy, it offers potential for more security, less environmental impact, and maybe even keeping the economic benefits more local. These community-led projects can really make a difference in speeding things up.
The source then gets into skill-based microeconomies. Sounds interesting. It's talking about setting up barter networks or time banks, where you trade hours of service instead of money. Skill-sharing platforms, maybe online ones like Simbi, or just creating local networks. The whole point is building self-reliance, local value systems that aren't just about cash. Organizing local barter markets is another suggestion.
Yeah, these alternative models can really boost community resilience. They let people exchange what they have, skills, goods, based on actual needs. And they can be a really valuable addition to the regular money system, especially, if the economy gets shaky.
Okay, education next. Decentralized education models. The source seems keen on things like unschooling, peer learning, and using all those online resources, Coursera, Khan Academy, that sort of thing. It frames this as making education more flexible, inclusive, more liberating, really, than just traditional school. It also mentions skill-sharing circles and community mentoring, practical skills, lifelong learning.
Which fits with recognizing that learning doesn't just happen in classrooms, right? It happens everywhere in lots of ways. These decentralized models can offer way more flexibility, personalization, let people learn in ways that suit them. And with all the online tools plus community initiatives, there are just so many more options now than there used to be.
It also brings up conscious tech use and digital detox, which, let's be honest, we probably all need. Suggestions like using simpler tools, setting screen time limits, choosing privacy-first apps, even taking regular digital Sabbaths. The goal is reclaiming our attention, basically, being less reliant on tech that might be designed to hook us or manipulate us. It even mentions switching to things like Graphene OS or using free and open source software FOSS apps for more digital autonomy.
Yeah, in this digital age, being mindful about tech use it's crucial. It really is.
Yeah.
Setting those boundaries, protecting our mental space online, it's essential if we want to stay focused, creative, and, actually connected to real people.
Then there's this idea of parallel structures in digital commons. This means supporting alternative platforms. It mentions Mastodon or Odyssey and building local mutual aid groups, independent media. The aim is to build resilience outside what the source sees as potentially fragile or, controlled mainstream systems. Supporting things like LBRY for decentralized content is also mentioned.
Developing these alternative platforms and networks, it can definitely foster more diversity, more viewpoints, different kinds of information, and provide spaces for people to connect and work together outside the usual big tech channels. That can be really valuable if you're looking for different perspectives or want more control over your data.
Okay, getting a bit deeper now. Mental and emotional decolonization. This sounds like inner work. Practices like journaling, shadow work, looking at the unconscious stuff, meditation. It suggests following people like Dr. Nicole LePera to kind of break free from old patterns, maybe trauma-driven ones. And cultivating emotional intelligence is key too. Self-awareness, healthier relationships.
That focus on inner work is fundamental, really. Our mental and emotional state shapes everything, how we see the world, how we act. So by dealing with those underlying patterns, building emotional resilience, it gives us more personal agency, lets us make more conscious choices.
And kind of related, rebuild culture and values. This is about community stuff, rituals, learning festivals, local storytelling, bringing back things like slow living, encouraging creativity, having more reverence for life, ways to strengthen the social fabric, it says, documenting elder wisdom, embracing a slower pace, enriching communities and ourselves.
It really highlights how important culture is in shaping what we value, how we behave. If we consciously try to nurture a culture that prioritizes connection, creativity, respect for each other and the planet, that can lead to a much more fulfilling, sustainable way of living.
And finally, the source makes a big push for creating an open archive of solutions. Basically, collect and share all this info about suppressed knowledge. Use podcasts, wikis, zines, whatever. Include personal stories, blueprints, practical wisdom. Make sure it's accessible, remembered, and can't be easily buried again. It ends that section with a really strong line. We don't need permission to heal or to innovate. The tools are already here.
That's a powerful call to action, isn't it? It emphasizes just how important collective knowledge is, and the need to preserve and share stuff that might have been pushed to the margins or just forgotten. An archive like that could be an amazing resource for people looking for alternatives for sparking new ideas.
Okay, shifting gears again. The source looks at the Cobra Effect on a global scale. It gives examples where big global policies, probably well-intentioned, actually made things worse.
Yeah, this is a really critical look at just how complex it is to implement solutions worldwide. When you're dealing with huge interconnected problems, unintended consequences are almost inevitable if you're not careful.
So example one, climate change policies. It points out how sometimes subsidies meant for green energy ended up benefiting fossil fuel companies because of how green was defined. Loopholes, basically. And also how strict rules in one place might just push polluting industries to countries with looser rules. So you're just moving the pollution, not reducing it overall.
Right. That shows how policy design really, really matters. The details are crucial. And it highlights how you need international cooperation. Otherwise, you risk just playing whack-a-mole with environmental problems.
Then it brings up the war on drugs. The source argues that really harsh crackdowns haven't stopped drug use, but have led to powerful cartels, overflowing prisons, economic ruin in some places.
That's a hugely debated area, of course. But the source's view aligns with critics who point out the negative social and economic fallout from strict prohibition. They often suggest alternatives like harm reduction or tackling the root causes of why people turn to drugs in the first place might be more effective.
Globalization for prosperity is another one it critiques. saying, okay, maybe the intention was growth for everyone, but trade deals sometimes hurt local economies, widened the gap between rich and poor, led to job losses, and that in turn fueled nationalism and discontent.
Well, globalization's effects are definitely mixed. It's been discussed endlessly. Sure, it brought economic benefits for some, but it created real challenges for others. Job competition, potential exploitation in some areas. It's not a simple picture.
It also looks at tech-based educational reform, like just giving out laptops in developing countries without training teachers or having the right infrastructure. The source claims sometimes that just led to kids getting distracted, becoming dependent on the tech without actually learning more.
That really underscores how you need to integrate tech thoughtfully. It's not magic. Just dropping devices into schools without support, without changing teaching methods, it might not help and could even make things worse for some kids.
And public health mandates. The source suggests that sometimes strict rules pushed through without really engaging the community ended up breeding distrust, maybe even anti-science sentiment, with misinformation spreading like wildfire in reaction.
Yeah, public health works best with clear communication, transparency, and community buy-in. That trust is vital. If people don't understand or trust the process, it can really backfire and make it harder to achieve the health goals.
NGO aid in crisis zones is another example. The claim here is that sometimes free aid gets seized by warlords, or it creates long-term dependency instead of helping people become self-sufficient again.
Humanitarian aid in crises is incredibly tricky. There's no easy answer. But it's so important for aid efforts to be sensitive to the local situation, avoid making conflicts worse, and really focus on building resilience for the long haul.
And lastly, financial bailouts.
Yeah.
The argument is that saving big banks but not necessarily helping ordinary people creates moral hazard. Banks take bigger risks knowing they'll get bailed out and makes the whole economy more fragile.
Bailouts are always controversial, aren't they? There are arguments for them, preventing total collapse.
Yeah.
But also strong arguments against them, saying they reward bad behavior and increase inequality. It's a tough balance.
Okay, so that leads us to this curated list of forbidden or hidden solutions the source puts together. It's basically a collection of these potentially world-changing ideas that, according to the source, got stopped in their tracks.
Yeah, this list really puts specific examples to the bigger themes we've been talking about. Suppressed innovation, vested interests getting in the way.
Top of the list, no surprise. Nikola Tesla's free energy. His vision of wireless power, which the source repeats, was supposedly defunded by J.P. Morgan because, well, how do you put a meter on it? No clear profit path.
Like we touched on earlier, it's such a potent example of that clash between radical new tech and the established economic logic.
Next, cannabis as medicine. The source says it was common historically, but then banned. Why? Politics, racism, competition from other industries like pharma and textiles. A whole mix.
It really shows how non-scientific factors, social, political, economic, can totally shape the legal status and availability of natural substances, even ones with potential health benefits.
Permaculture and regenerative farming are on the list too, described as these sustainable ways of farming that got pushed aside by industrial agriculture, which was all about maximizing yields with monocrops.
Yeah, reinforcing that tension again. Ecologically sound practices versus industrial models focused on short-term output and profit.
Then there's the really controversial one, cold fusion, or low-energy nuclear reactions. The source claims it was dismissed too quickly as junk science, even though it could potentially be a clean, abundant energy source.
That's a good example of how prevailing scientific views and maybe institutional skepticism can make it really hard for unconventional ideas to get a fair hearing or funding, even if they might have huge potential.
Psychedelics for mental health, LSD, psilocybin, MDMA. The source notes they were criminalized largely due to political fears, which basically shut down promising research into their therapeutic uses for decades.
Right, it shows how the social and political mood can directly impact scientific progress, especially in sensitive areas like mental health treatment.
Bucky Fuller's Dime Action House. This innovative, affordable, sustainable housing design, mentioned as being rejected by the mainstream construction industry.
Suggests how established industries can sometimes resist innovations that really shake up their way of doing things, their business models.
Open source medicine and vaccines. Developing treatments nonprofit style. The source says this approach struggles because big pharma prefers protecting intellectual property and the profit motive that comes with it.
Which raises really big ethical questions about access to medicine, doesn't it? And the role profit should play in developing life-saving treatments.
Basic income models, giving everyone a regular, unconditional income. Included here because, the source claims, elites reject it, fearing it'll make people lazy, even when pilot programs show positive results.
That touches on really fundamental debates about welfare, security, the future of work, especially with automation changing things so much.
Then the really out there one, water fuel technology. Inventors claiming they made engines run on water. The source mentions patents disappearing, inventors facing ridicule, even vanishing mysteriously.
Yeah, while the scientific community is often very skeptical about this, the persistent fascination with water fuel shows that deep desire for clean, superabundant energy, doesn't it?
And finally, ancient healing systems in energy medicine. Things like Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, listed as being largely pushed aside by Western pharma-focused medicine despite their long history and claims of effectiveness.
Which brings us back to that earlier point about valuing different healing traditions and the dominance of one particular medical model.
Right. So after listing all these potentially lost ideas, the source then asks, okay, what can we do? How do we revive these things and build a better future?
Yeah, this is where it gets really proactive again, offering a sense of hope, potential for actual change.
It talks about reclaiming and resurrecting these ideas, using modern tools, AI, open source, crowdfunding, decentralized networks, all the new tech. It even gives an example, like imagine a grassroots group actually building a modern Dime-action village based on Fuller's ideas.
It highlights how today's tech might actually help overcome some of those old barriers that stopped innovation or suppressed ideas in the past.
And it stresses building a coalition of uncommon thinkers, bringing together people from science, philosophy, healing, art, tech, diverse minds, forming a hidden solutions council or some kind of virtual think tank to explore these overlooked paths.
That really emphasizes the value of crossing disciplines, thinking outside the usual boxes, right? Breaking down those silos.
And to avoid that Cobra Effect trap, it suggests redesigning incentives, shifting priorities towards regeneration, transparency, long-term well-being, maybe using things like crypto economics, DAOs, those decentralized autonomous organizations, or co-op ownership models.
So, tackling the systemic issues head on, the things that might have led to suppression in the first place. Trying to build new frameworks that reward different outcomes, different values.
Empowering local action that can have a global impact is another point. Basically, try things out. Run pilot projects in communities to show these rediscovered solutions actually work in the real world.
Yeah, that practical demonstration is key. Showing tangible results is how you build momentum and get wider acceptance.
The source also talks about protecting the people who push boundaries. Whistleblowers, rebel innovators, suggesting things like anonymous networks, encrypted tech, legal shields, getting public support behind them.
Which acknowledges the reality, right? Challenging the status quo, challenging powerful interests. It can be risky, so you need ways to protect the people driving change.
And it calls for educating the awakening generation, creating that global lost solutions archive we talked about, making sure these ideas aren't lost again.
Education is critical, isn't it? Making sure future generations know about these alternative possibilities, know the history, empowering them.
Finally, it encourages every single one of us to figure out our role. Are you an archivist? A builder?
Right.
A connector? A protector? A voice for these solutions?
It gives everyone a way in, doesn't it? Recognizes that different people have different skills, different passions, and all can contribute to bringing these ideas forward.
Okay, but then the source takes a darker turn again with a section called The Great Killing Machine, Truth as a Threat. The argument here gets really intense. It's saying it wasn't just solutions that were crushed, but things like hope, healing, freedom, our very humanity. Because, in the source's words, a free human who knows the truth is ungovernable, unprofitable, dangerous.
Wow, yeah. That's a very strong, provocative framing. It dives deep into potential motives linking suppression to fundamental issues of power and control in society.
It gives examples like the historical persecution of natural healers,
Yeah.
shamans, and mentions the suspicious deaths of holistic doctors who allegedly expose corruption, points to plant medicines being banned while pharmaceuticals get pushed.
Those are extremely serious claims. They suggest a real conflict between, say, natural healing and the economic drivers of the pharmaceutical industry. Obviously, claims like that need careful consideration, investigation, evidence, but it's the perspective the source puts forward.
It also mentions the killing of inventors, particularly in free energy, cites Tesla dying broke, his research seized, challenges faced by early internet pioneers, too.
These accounts, While often debated in detail, they do highlight the potential struggles faced by people proposing truly radical shifts that could disrupt major industries or power structures.
Then there's the killing of cultures, suppressing indigenous knowledge, spiritual traditions,
Mhm.
replacing them with more consumerist or divisive ways of thinking.
That perspective really forces you to question the impact of modernization and globalization on cultural diversity and traditional wisdom. The potential loss there is a huge concern for many.
It talks about the killing of alternatives, too. Regenerative farming, co-ops, things the source believes are systematically undervalued compared to big corporate models.
Yeah, reinforcing that idea that the dominant system might just naturally favor certain ways of doing things, certain business structures, and sideline others, even if those others have social or environmental benefits.
And finally, it argues our spirit is being killed. Through too much screen time, manipulative ads, dehumanizing jobs, rote learning, divisive narratives.
That's a sweeping critique of modern life, isn't it? Raising big questions about the society we're building and how it affects us psychologically, emotionally, our sense of autonomy.
But the source ends that part by saying the biggest fear of these suppressive forces is remembrance. The moment we collectively remember these lost truths and a new generation just says, no more.
It speaks to the potential power of just waking up. Collective awareness driving a desire for change, challenging the old systems.
Which leads very logically into the final big proposal, building a digital archive of suppressed solutions. It even throws out some names for the movement, Truth Revival Project, the Forgotten Cure movement, trying to create that shared identity.
Yeah, it's a very concrete call to action. A practical step towards preserving and sharing all this knowledge the source feels has been unfairly buried or ignored.
It lays out phases. Phase 1, set up categories: health, energy, mental peace, food, education, economy, housing, social unity. Phase 2, gather the info, names, ideas, links, why it was suppressed, how to revive it, create accessible stuff, PDFs, websites, activist materials.
It's a solid framework for organizing a huge amount of diverse information, making
Yeah.
it usable for people looking into these alternative solutions.
It suggests names for the archive too. The Reclaimed Library,
Yeah.
Buried Truths Archive. Each name gives it a slightly different feel,
The name matters, doesn't it? Shapes how people see it, what it represents.
and it outlines a core structure. Detailed categories covering suppressed cures, banned scientists, DIY medicine, indigenous farming, seed saving, free energy models, DIY setups, spiritual methods, alternative learning, co-op models, low-cost housing, banned books. It's comprehensive.
Yeah, trying to capture the whole spectrum of this potentially lost or marginalized knowledge and make it easy to find what you're looking for.
Lots of format options too. Interactive website, public cloud storage like Google Drive or Mega, a big downloadable PDF codex, maybe Telegram or Discord channels for community, even encrypted USBs for secure sharing.
Offering multiple formats is smart. Makes it accessible to more people, more resilient against being taken down or lost.
And finally, Phase 2 outlines roles for contributors. Archivists gathering info, witnesses sharing experiences, builders creating the platform, protectors safeguarding it, connectors spreading the word.
It really emphasizes that this would have to be a collaborative effort, that people with all sorts of different skills could play a part in making it happen.
The source really wraps up this section powerfully, saying this archive isn't just about information storage. It's framed as an act of defiance, a resurrection of potential, a collective rebuilding of memory for freedom and well-being.
That's a strong finish. It really underscores the potential significance of creating something like this, framing it as a vital step towards a future where people are more informed, more empowered.
So, wow. Today's deep dive has really taken us through a lot, hasn't it? Highlighting this core idea that maybe, just maybe, many solutions to really big problems got lost along the way, or were actively suppressed. From Tesla's free energy dreams to plant medicines, regenerative farming, the sources paint this picture of progress not always being a straight upward line.
Yeah, what really stands out is that recurring theme, how power structures, economic incentives might have played a role in what got developed and what got sidelined. But also, there's a thread of hope, isn't there? This growing movement reflected in the source to rediscover and revive those lost truths. And that idea of creating an open archive feels incredibly relevant right now with all the concerns about information control and censorship.
Absolutely. It should definitely leave you, the listener, with a pretty powerful thought to chew on. What else might have been buried? What other knowledge is out there? And maybe more importantly, what role can each of us play in digging it up, evaluating it, and maybe even applying it to build a genuinely better future?
Perhaps this deep dive inspires you to look closer at some of these ideas yourself, do some more research, or maybe even connect with others who are already working to bring this potentially suppressed knowledge back into the light. Thanks for sharing these really thought-provoking sources and for going on this journey of discovery with us today.